Welcome to this very special event. I am Selma Kanisi, board member of the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion with Cassie Cho, founder and editor-in-chief of Almost, an Instagram first news outlet. She previously was an audience development editor at QuickTake by Bloomberg and at BuzzFeed News. She has helped Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Channel 4 News, WaterAid, and Flow grow their digital audiences. The Society of Professional Journalists is the nation's most broad-based journalism organization dedicated to encouraging the free practice of journalism and stimulating high standards of ethical behavior. The SPJ DC chapter supports journalism and journalists throughout the Washington, D.C. area. The DC chapter, for instance, is working to secure unfettered access for reporters to government news sources, support whistleblowers, and stand up for journalists when they are threatened or their work is interfered with. SPJ DC organizes regular sessions to learn about journalism issues and develop journalism skills. The chapter conducts an annual journalism contest, holds an annual awards dinner, and creates other opportunities for members to socialize. In addition, SPJ-DC is the host chapter for SPJ's National Conference in 2022, so keep your eyes open for that. We welcome all of you to learn more about SPJ and become a member. Information is at our website, www.spjdc.org. So, without further ado, let's get started. Social media seems like something you would want to avoid using. What with disinformation and opportunities for embarrassment that could lead to problems, both professional and personal. But what if social media could actually be a useful tool in your journalism career? Cassie will be discussing with us how we can turn social media from a potential liability into an actual professional asset for journalists. Welcome, Cassie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, we all have our own origin stories about how and when we started using social media. What's your story?
Sure. So I have been using social media for a very long time now. Just as when I was younger, I've always been someone who really, really enjoyed sort of just like playing on the internet. And so I've always sort of just been really interested in how just sort of spending time online and just having fun online and sort of trying out different sort of this is when I was in like high school or like intermediate and sort of trying out, new technologies and like new websites and new tools and all those sorts of things. So when I was in college, I studied communication studies at UCLA, and I wrote for the Daily Bruin, which is the UCLA's college paper. And so during this time, because I had always sort of really been really interested in online and the internet, this was around the time that mobile journalism, or Mojo as we used to call it, was sort of kicking off. And the Daily Bruin was sort of starting this mobile journalism blog. And so I applied as a news reporter, sort of writing like articles for the newspaper. But then as soon as they sort of launched this Mojo initiative, I was really interested. So I applied to be a reporter for Mojo. And so I was going around sort of on campus just reporting on stuff for social. So I'd be, making, taking photos and then writing sort of like blog posts back in the day. And then after college, I graduated and then I moved back to Taiwan, where I currently am actually. But this is a little bit more complicated. I do like leave Taiwan and then come back. But after college, I graduated and I was working in Taiwan at ICRT, which Dan and I were just speaking about. So it's a radio station, Taiwan's only English radio station, as a news anchor. And because I'd always been so I was sort of reporting on the news online. But because I'd always been really interested in sort of the internet, as I was sort of talking about, I sort of started to just offered to start playing around with ICRT's social media and also like online website. Like we started a blog, and then we started to have some fun on social media, especially with a focus on Facebook, which is quite big in Taiwan. And so then I went to then I moved to London, where I eventually worked at BuzzFeed News, where I joined as a global news reporter and producer, basically hired at the time to sort of experiment with news videos. So this was around the time that news videos were sort of kicking off, especially on Facebook. And so our team was sort of tasked with staying 6 months ahead of everybody and sort of experimenting with how we could use videos to tell news stories on social media. So we started sort of going about, outside again, sort of filming stuff, and then just sort of putting videos together and sort of figuring out how we could use it to tell stories, and then seeing what worked. And then once we sort of figured that out, we were then able to sort of inform the rest of the newsroom and teach them how to sort of think about videos and the types of stuff that worked so that they could then start sort of implementing the things that we had learned. But it wasn't really until sort of, I guess, after like a year and a half, this was around the time that Instagram started get kind of kicking off as well, and a lot of people started sort of using Instagram. That somebody on BuzzFeed News was sort of like, oh, hey, we have this amazing account, Instagram account. Its handle is just world, and we have not really been using it. Does anyone want to sort of like give it a go and see if we can do anything with it? And they came to our team because we were doing a lot of global news reporting, which they thought that would fit in really well with sort of the handle of at world. And so obviously put my hand up and said, yes, I'd love to give it sort of way with sort of like how we did with like news videos, but we do it on like Instagram this time just to figure out what works. And this was before every news or publication was really sort of thinking about Instagram as a place for news, which we have seen sort of the explosion in the past year or two. But I think it was then that I sort of realized that, and then I started posting on the world account and it started doing really well. I ended up, at first I was just sort of like, oh, let me just like take content that the world team is producing and then put it on Instagram. But it soon became really apparent that, they weren't producing enough content for me to be sharing, and the audience wanted more. And so I started sort of just looking for news myself and breaking news, especially making news, creating content, especially for Instagram. So doing a sort of Instagram first approach. And then that actually worked really well. And at World became the fastest growing news account on Instagram in 2018. And what was really exciting was sort of, it was all young people. So young people were really, it sort of showed me, and I think the world at the time, that, young people really do want news, and it's just not really being delivered to them in ways that make sense to them and on platforms that they are on, and in formats that are like that they understand. And so I think it was around that time that I sort of realized that, I sort of realized, oh, I think this is a place I really enjoy sort of working in social media and also in audience development. And then I sort of looked back at my career and then I realized, I've always been sort of doing it, even though I just didn't really know what it was at the time. Like when I was at ICRT, for example, and when I was at the Daily Bruin, there was no really like audience development really hadn't really become sort of a concept then, but I'd sort of always been doing it. And so I've been doing it since. And to this day, I am still sort of working in sort of social and also audience development.
Gosh, that is an amazing journey. Thank you for sharing. Personally, I one of my college friends pressured me to start using social media, but I only started really school. Why should journalists use social media in their professional lives?
Yeah, sure. I think this is definitely a question that, everyone sort of thinks about when they're journalists, when they're sort of working in, say, print, for example, or maybe even just like online. People just sort of they focus. Everyone seems to, everyone puts a lot of focus into the work that they do and the reporting that they're doing. But I think social media is such a great tool for you to really connect with your audience. There's a lot of potential for you to sort of build your own brand as well as a journalist, so that people sort of recognize you and build up your trust and credibility as well, so that you can sort of use it as an additional sort of tool to sort of reach your audience and make sure that you are sort of known in your spheres, because as we sort of know, especially like younger people, because as we sort of know, younger people are not really sort of habits are really changing, and like young people are not necessarily sort of opening up their laptops and then like opening up a Google Chrome browser and then going in and typing, www.newyorktimes.com to like read the news every morning. They're on their phones, they're on scrolling through TikTok, having reaching new audiences that are sort of changing in their habits and how they consume news, then I think social media is a really great way for you to do that, because it allows you to sort of reach these audiences in places that they're spending their time, versus you hoping that you will come to them, they will come to you, but it's more that you will go to them as well. And then it's also just sort of, it's nice to be able to sort of build up a sort of, it depends, I guess, if you're trying to build up your career as a journalist, it's really a really key tool to sort of shaping how you sort of see how your career is sort of perceived, and like the beats that you are known for, sort of building up your personality instead of sort of relying on, say, your publications media sort of social media to sort of drive the traffic, because they have more followings than us. But your personal accounts really allow you to have the ability to sort of for you to shape how your brand, and sort of shape how your narrative, and also like give sort of behind the scenes look into like your life and your professional endeavors, and sort of like provide perspective as to like the work that you do for the audience, which then again sort of humanizes you and makes it seem a little bit more personal, so that people will be able to better connect with you and to really like engage with your stories.
Oh gosh, that is an excellent answer. Thank you so much for sharing all of these promising tips on how to develop a professional brand. I know as a journalist, I have often used social media to promote my stories and not so much the personal human side. So thank you. Now, here is a little challenge that I have come across, and I'm sure other journalists have as well. How can journalists keep their professional and personal worlds separate on social media?
Yeah, that is definitely a really good question. And I think a lot of people sort of struggle with sort of finding that balance. So it depends on sort of the brand that you want to build for yourself. So some people are very open and they don't really mind sort of having a mix of everything on their social media. But then others sort of prefer to keep things really professional, which is also fine. And then it also depends on your platform. So for example, if you're sort of on Instagram, for example, this is probably a place that you want to be able to include a mix of sort of, and also on TikTok, sort of the platforms that are a lot more visual. You probably want to think about having a sort of balance or a mix of sort of professional and personal life content. However, if you'd like to really sort of just make that separation, what you can do is you can start two pages. So you can have a professional page where you sort of, whether say on Facebook, you have a Facebook page as like a figure, or you have your public Twitter account, but then maybe you have your public Instagram, but maybe you start like a private one, which is for you to share, or just like a separate one. It doesn't necessarily have to be private. So for example, my Instagram, I have my main Instagram, which is instagram.com/Cassie, which is where I share all of my work. And sometimes, some behind the scenes sort of looks into like my life, or when I'm on reporting trips, or behind the scenes on video shoots, maybe in stories, or so you can also think about like sort of the distinction between the features of the platform. So for example, on Instagram, maybe you want to keep things professional on your feed, because that is where new followers are going to see your work. And then maybe you can think of like stories as sort of like behind the scenes, or like slices of your life that you show with your audience. Or you then have, as I was saying, then I have like a separate Instagram account, which is actually just focused on sort of I really like taking photos, but the photos that I take, it's not what my followers follow me for. So I have a separate account which has obviously fewer followers, but it's just for me to sort of share my own stuff, bits and pieces from my life, and it's followed by sort of just my close friends kind of thing. So you can sort of make that distinction by having two separate accounts, keeping things separate if that is what you'd like, or if you want to have sort of a mix of sort of content between your professional life and your personal life, then what you can do is most people like to say the ratio should be around 80% work to 20% sort of your personal content. So keeping sort of that in mind, maybe say like, oh, every 5 posts, I can post like 1 post about myself or something like that. But having sort of that is also helpful because it's important that you come off as like a normal human being online instead of just something that someone that sort of, or like a bot that just like retweets and reshares your work. So people don't like to follow things that are just sort of a regurgitation of or stuff that looks sort of like a bot where it's just like, oh, all I do is like share the headline of my story with like a link. They want to be able to see some sort of human element behind it. So a lot of times that's like, oh, here's a behind the scenes photo, or maybe you write a caption that sort of offers a little bit more of perspective and sort of personality versus just like retweeting and resharing the copy that you wrote, for example. So just to sort of recap, like you can sort of have a separate accounts. You can have a private account or non-private, just personal account that you use for your friends and family, or just for anyone who's interested in, if it's public, for anyone who's interested in your sort of life, and then having, a professional account. But it's highly recommended for professional accounts that you sort of do like a 80% 20% ratio of sort of between professional content and also personal content, so that people feel like you are like a human and they can connect with you a little bit more.
Well, thank you for the recap, Cassie, and those are really helpful tips to use to carry on and move forward with this social media journey. So now this has happened to me, and I'm wondering, it might seem like an inevitable thing as you get older, but there are high school people you know from high school or relatives who want to connect with you on social media. What do you do?
Yeah, it can be really awkward when you sort of don't want to add them, for example, because you feel like, oh, it's been a while, or you're just not really sure. So this is when sort of having the two accounts potentially could be something helpful, where you can say, hey, yeah, you can follow like my professional work account, or here's them, like, for example, I usually, like, if I feel uncomfortable with sort of being added on like my personal account, for example, I'll just sort of direct them to the public account or like my media outlet, which is called Almost. So I'll say, hey, yeah, you can follow my media outlet and you can see all the work that I've been doing there, instead of necessarily being like, yeah, you can follow my private account. So a lot of times, the other thing that you can also do is, on a lot of these accounts now, you can obviously have sort of like close friends features. So what you can do is you can add people, and that's fine. You can keep them on like a public list that you can restrict, like for example, on Facebook, you can restrict the number of posts that you would like them, the types of posts that you would like them to see. So for example, people may only be able to see your public content, or you put them on a list and they can only see your specific content. And as we know, also on Instagram, there's also the ability to sort of have like a close friends list. So then that's just sort of that then comes down to sort of how you approach sharing your content. So maybe you post, content that you only want your close friends and family to see on your close friends list, but then everybody else can sort of see the other content, like your professional work that you're sharing. So I think it really comes down to sort of the type of relationship you would like to have with this person, and whether you feel comfortable with them seeing sort of the amount of stuff you'd like them to see. But there are always a lot of features that you can use to sort of ensure that they feel like they've been added, and they're still able to see the work that you do, and sort of feel like they're keeping up with your life without having to necessarily feel like you're having to share something with them that you don't feel comfortable with.
Gosh, that's a huge relief. Thank you, Cassie. So, in order to be successful with social media, I understand that good content is a must. How do you create good content, not just any content, but good content on a regular and consistent basis?
Yeah, I think consistency is like super important and is one of the things that I emphasize all the time when I'm speaking about social media in general, because what you really don't want is for people you don't really want to be like, oh, I'm going to come out and I'm going to post like 10 posts in a row and then I'm going to disappear for like 3 months, and then I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to post like 2 times, and then I'm going to disappear for months, and then I'm going to come back and post like 20 times in a row, and then I'll disappear for like a year. And that is really, really like detrimental to sort of your social growing your social media in general, because first of all, people don't like to be bombarded with content if they don't know that's what they should expect from a place, a social media account that they're following. And then, if you disappear for a while, people tend to forget about you, and then algorithm also forgets about you. And then if you suddenly sort of appear and then you post like 10 posts in a row, people are going to be like, wait, I don't remember sort of following this account, and now I'm suddenly getting like 10 bombarded with content, and there's like 10 posts. I really don't want to see this. I don't remember subscribing to this, so I'm just going to unfollow the account. And it also sort of hurts your sort of ranking in the algorithm, because posting regularly sort of shows the algorithm that you are a healthy and normal account that is actually trying to grow your followers. And then it then sort of shows your account, your content, to people who are following you. And then if you create good content, then people are likely to interact with it, which then sort of then feeds the algorithm again. So it's like, oh, regular interactions on this, so people must like this content, this must be good content, in which case we should continue to promote it. So sort of consistency is super important, and sort of how to achieve that is really I'll answer how to achieve consistency first before we sort of talk about how to make good content. But to achieve that is really sort of quite simple, actually. All you have to do is sort of take a look at, sort of make an assessment of your resources and sort of your output, to say, okay, and your time. So it's like, oh, how much time do I have in general to work on social media every week or every month or every day? And then, how much content am I putting out personally? How much of that can live on social media, or do I want to live on social media? And basically just make an assessment of sort of that, and then you're then able to sort of say, okay, maybe I can aim to post I don't know, once a day, or maybe I can aim to post every once a week, or maybe you want to post once a month. It doesn't really have to be so regular. Like, you don't have to post 8 times a day if you don't feel like you have the ability to. It's more just sort of setting that sort of minimum number of posts you would like to achieve in terms of consistency, and then just meeting that. So, if you say, I want to post once every day on like Mondays, then do that. Just make sure that you are doing it. And then, if suddenly you want to come out and you want to post something on a Wednesday, that's okay, because, as long as you're sort of meeting that sort of minimum threshold, that's really, really good. And so you can sort of achieve that through assessing your resources and your time and your output in general. And then sort of in line with that, after you are sort of, so, and then to sort of emphasize, it's better not to, to focus on quality over quantity. So instead of just sort of spamming people with, lower quality content, focusing on just sort of getting a lot of sort of content out, it's actually better to sort of make sure that you're creating good content. So when you're assessing that, you really want to be thinking about, like, how much time do I have to like realistically dedicate to making sure that the content is something that I've spent time on and is good. So in order to create good content, I guess we can sort of talk a little bit about that. It's important to sort of, first of all, sort of decide on your platforms. So it depends on, so this comes from sort of looking at your audience and your target audience, and, where they're spending their time, where does it sort of make sense for you to be, because, if you want to reach, young people, you probably want to be on TikTok. If you want to be sort of reaching other journalists, then you probably want to be on Twitter, for example. And then just sort of spending time on these platforms, which I think is super important to sort of understand how these platforms work. So just sort of studying how like normal people use Instagram, for example. So a lot of times when I'm sort of coming up with ideas for different types of content to share on different platforms. So for example, if I'm focusing on Instagram, what I'll do is I'll just sort of take a look at, for example, I might look at some other competitors. So I might look at some other media outlets who are also covering world news, and see how they are covering world news, and the types of topics that they choose. And then sort of taking a look at, the types of formats that they use, or I might be looking at other journalists. But I think it's also really important to venture outside of media in general, because it can kind of tend to be a sort of a bubble. And so you sort of want to take a look at, how normal people, average everyday users are sort of using the platform and consuming content on the platform. So I might look at, for example, because the target audience for Almost is teen girls, is young people, and especially young women. So I might take a look at teen girls and how they use Instagram. So I might see, oh, okay, I didn't realize that, they're posting carousels with like information about, resources that you can use to help Ukraine, for example. So that might be a really interesting sort of idea that I could potentially adopt to use in news. So sort of looking at how normal people sort of use the platform, and then thinking about those formats and sort of how you can use them to sort of I guess, apply to your own stories that you are telling. This then makes it seem like your content is a lot more native to the platform. So it doesn't necessarily feel like, it's very jarring for someone. Say, for example, they're scrolling on TikTok and suddenly they see like a super polished, video that's really highly produced. They're probably going to think this is an ad. Like, I don't want to see this because this isn't the type of content that, is on TikTok. I want to see like, very authentic sort of lo-fi videos. And so, this makes sure that, this helps you to sort of ensure that your content feels like it fits on the platform, which is a really important sort of factor to have when you are sort of trying to get people to sort of share your content and to connect with your content in general. I think the other thing to really think about is when you're sort of starting out is to really sort of set some missions and goals. So I think setting a mission can be really important for both you and the audience, because having a mission really helps you to sort of define, it sort of helps to become sort of like an overarching vision that helps you to define sort of your decisions about the content that you curate and you sort of create in general. So for example, when I sort of founded Almost, I was thinking, okay, the mission is I like to think of it as sort of Humans of the World meets Teen Vogue. And so the mission is to inform young people, and especially young women, about important things that are going on around the world. It's also to sort of reflect the diverse and young audience, to make sure that we're sort of highlighting underreported and underserved communities, and being able to help them to share their experiences. So having that sort of mission then sort of becomes easier for me to make decisions on the day-to-day basis. So for example, if I see a piece of news, I'm going to think, okay, does this piece of news sort of fit my mission? Does it serve my audience? So you want to, and say, if it does, say, for example, the war breaks out in Ukraine. Is this an important sort of global news event that, young people should know about? And the answer is yes. And so then I should definitely cover it. And so having that really helps you to sort of make decisions about, the types of content you want to cover. And then then you can sort of make these decisions and say, okay, yeah, I need to cover this. And sometimes it might be difficult. So you might encounter a piece of content that's, say really, really great, fits your mission. That your audience is going to love it. You're seeing them post all about it, and you think this is really, really good. I should definitely like share this. However, say I'm working on Instagram, there's no photos, there is no video. How am I going to make something about this? It seems like it's going to be really difficult. So maybe I should just pass on it. That is really a shame, because you should really be thinking being very mission driven and sort of audience first. So always making sure that every piece of content that you post on your account is sort of in line with that and serving your audience. And so it's sort of up to you then. Say you encounter this amazing piece, this story, but there's just factors blocking you from being able to share it. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily pass on it. It should mean that it means that you should be able to. It means that it's up to you to sort of come up with a new format or come up with a new way of sharing this with your audience, because you're thinking audience first. You're putting them first, rather than, oh, this is too hard for me to work out how to share on social media, so maybe I'll just not post about it. And being able, these challenges are exciting as well, because sort of this is how innovation happens. Because when you're faced with these challenges, and say, for example, you're covering a really invisible sort of big notion of, like, I don't know, say like Brexit is probably the best example of this, where it's like, it's going to affect everything, but it's also not going to affect anything. It's also super not visual. So how do you really sort of demonstrate that? How do you sort of cover a topic like that? It forces you to sort of think in different and creative ways. And so maybe you might think, okay, instead of the usual approach of just like using a photo, maybe I want to make an infographic. Maybe I want to make a video. Maybe I want to do something different, or create a new style that hasn't existed before. And then your audience could really engage with that and respond to that. And then you might then say, oh, I didn't realize that this could work, so let me try and do that again. And then you can sort of see if your audience sort of engages with that. So that sort of ties into my sort of third point of how to make sort of good content is to just always sort of experiment. So as you can then see, like, looking at data is just like super important, because it's like a real-time signal of sort of what your audience likes and doesn't like. And so when you try out something new, you come up with a theory and you say, hey, I wonder if I can do something like this. And then you just sort of like try it out, and then you can look at the data and you can see, oh, okay, I thought that it would do really well, but it's completely flopped and nobody sort of engaged with it. But that doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that, oh, I guess that means I should never do this again. It sort of means that, you can think about, how can I take a lesson from this? Like, if a similar story does sort of come around again, how can I do something different and see if, my audience will engage with it this time? So you might think, okay, maybe I can write the headline a little differently, or maybe I can choose a different photo. And so then you develop these theories, and then you can start to test them out. And then again, you can look at the data and you can say, oh, okay, maybe because I tweaked this headline, people are now responding to it. And then you can develop another theory and say, okay, maybe if I write my headlines like this, then people like that. And so you can test it out, and then you can start basically building up, like, I guess, like evidence of like stuff that works. And then you can sort of say, oh, okay, I've done this like 3 or 4 times now, and every time that I consistently do this, people consistently sort of like it. I can see that they're liking my content, and I can see that they're sharing my content. And then there you have it. You have a new format that is tried and tested and works and your audience likes. And so it's really important to sort of make sure that, first of all, you have like a clear overarching vision. So your mission and knowing who your audience is. So thinking about, where is my audience spending my time? Where can I best serve them? And then having that mission also helps you to make the decisions. So making sure that every piece of content that you create or share on your social media is in line with that vision. Because if you think about sort of from the audience perspective of somebody coming over from someone who doesn't follow you, for example, and they somehow encounter your content, they end up on your profile, what are they going to do? As a person who just uses social media, what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to look at your profile photo, I'm going to read your bio, and then I'm probably going to scroll down a bit, and I'm going to look at some posts. And if it's really clear sort of what your posts are about, and I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm scrolling down on almost Instagram, I can see, oh, it's about world news, it's really focused on people stories, I really want to know more about the world, this seems interesting for me, I understand what this content I'm subscribing to, so I'm going to subscribe. Or I might be someone who's not interested in the world news, for example, I might be interested in tech, and I might be like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a look at this, and then, oh, it doesn't seem like they cover much about finance and tech, so I don't think this is something for me, so I'm not going to subscribe. But at least they can make a sort of clear distinction and make a clear decision about the type of content that they're going to be able to get as an audience. So that's sort of thinking about that, where versus like, if you don't really share content that is sort of in line with the mission and it feels all over the place. So if somebody is scrolling down who doesn't follow you, and then they scroll down and then they see like, okay, they seem to post a little bit about this thing, but they also post a little bit about this thing, I don't really understand what this whole profile is about, so I'm probably not going to subscribe to it. So it's just really important to make sure that, it's in line with the mission, and then you can sort of start to test out sort of different types of formats, and just don't be afraid to like experiment with stuff. Like, social media is such an exciting space because, it's sort of like you can use it as a testing ground for sort of like bigger stories, and sort of versus like, the website where it feels daunting. It's like, oh, it's going to live there forever. But like on social media, stuff has sometimes a shorter lifespan or sometimes a longer lifespan, but it gives you like real-time data almost like immediately, which is really, really exciting for you to sort of try out different things, and then really like looking at the data and listening to sort of what your audience likes.
Wow, thank you for that very comprehensive answer, Cassie. And I really like the concept of a mission to tie everything together. So it looks like we're starting to get some questions right now, and I want to give the audience the chance to have their questions answered if they feel compelled to participate. So we have one from SPJ National President Rebecca Aguilar. She asks, how often do you post on Instagram with news stories that you produce? And are there best days and times to post on Instagram? Which ties in with my question about how often you should use social media in your professional life and post as well.
Sure. So to answer the question as to how often I post on Instagram, in terms of news stories. Usually I try to post on Instagram 2 to 3 times a day. That is based on an assessment of, my time and my resources, because, I've got a bunch of other stuff going on. So I can't just dedicate all my time to sort of posting on Instagram. However, based on that, I think I can do at least a minimum of like 2 posts a day. So I try to aim for 2 posts a day, because, it takes time to produce this content. And then in terms of like times to post on Instagram, a lot of people sort of ask this question, but I think it really sort of depends. It's not necessarily as important as you think it is, because the feed is not necessarily chronological. I know that they're sort of making a move back towards that slowly, but it's not like fully chronological either. But basically, you just want to make sure that it's more thinking about how you can make sure that you are creating the best piece of content possible, and that if someone were to encounter your content whenever you post it, they want to do something with it. So making sure that it's like, oh, maybe they want to like it, maybe they want to like comment, maybe they want to share it, because those are sort of vital signals to the algorithm that this is a piece of content that people really like, and then that sort of helps to rank it in the algorithm, which then in turn boosts it, so that even if you post it at like a weird time, but every single person that saw it at that weird time engaged with it, then Instagram is going to promote that to your followers who may be potentially sleeping at this time, but when they wake up in the morning, Instagram's going to put that right at the top of their feed, because they'll say, oh, every single person who's seen this post has liked it, so it's like, oh, this is a good post, people are going to share it more, it's going to help you go viral. So essentially it's more sort of thinking about how you can sort of create a piece of content that people will want to engage with, versus focusing so much on the time, because the time is not going to necessarily make a huge difference. Ideally, if you want to, you can share it at the time that most of your followers are online, but at the same time, they're not necessarily going to see the post immediately, because they might be halfway through scrolling through the feed, and then it might show up at the top, but they're like halfway through, so it's not going to show up until the next time that they open the app. So it's more sort of focusing on the content and the quality of the content, and making sure that everyone who sees it wants to do something with it. That's sort of how to make sure that your content is seen by your audience.
Fantastic. So we have a few more questions on the docket. So we have a few questions about your web source, Almost. On Almost, you use short clips of video and with text layered on top, and you are on camera. Do you use green screen to produce the video? What tools do you do to produce the short video? And from the same person, asking, when you use a video clip or photo on your Instagram Almost, do you have to get permission from the original source, like a TV network or New York Times? Is there a media company who does not allow you to use their stuff?
Yeah, so when we're sort of talking about the short clips of videos with the text on top, it's and me on camera, that's really like the style of content that you see on TikTok. So I do use the green screen feature just with it. It's a filter within Instagram, and also on TikTok. So it's pretty good actually. You don't actually need a green screen to be able to do that. So nowadays you can really, it's very scrappy, and you can but it's also very in line with the content that lives on TikTok and also on Instagram Reels, which is very like authentic, sort of like lo-fi homemade style in the moment, versus like high quality, highly produced content. So I use the green screen filter on Instagram and TikTok, depending on which tool I prefer. You can use both of them, but basically it just generates like a green screen for you. If you want like better contrast, just make sure that, say for example, this probably isn't going to work very well because my hair is pretty brown and it's also against a brown background. So maybe I want to choose something with a little higher contrast. Maybe like the blue wall would probably work quite well, so that it will pick up the green screen the best. And then in terms of producing like short videos, the tools that I use, so obviously I use Instagram and TikTok to produce the TikTok videos that I'm creating. So I I film on my phone within the apps, and then I edit within the apps as well. But if you want to sort of get a little bit more advanced in terms of like making short videos, so nowadays obviously you can just use your phone, but you can also, on your computer, if you want to like sort of join stuff together, you want to do some like post-production treatment, you want to brighten up a few things, add some text, you can obviously use like Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere, which are options that you have to pay for. But there are also some free options online. So there's a great website which allows a great video editor website called Kapwing, kapwing.com. That is basically a lightweight version of like a video editor, which you can sort of put text on top and animate things coming in and out and combine clips and trim them and so on. There are also a lot of like phone apps that you can use sort of beyond just sort of Instagram and TikTok's editors if you don't want to use Instagram and generally native to the platforms. And then the other question is, when I use a video clip or photo on your Instagram, do I have to get permission from the original source? So for Almost, we have a subscription for Getty and Reuters, which I pay for. However, if you are sort of freelance journalist, for example, or somewhere, you don't necessarily have these resources. So this is sort of quite a bit of a sort of gray area in terms of sort of the content that you can use. A lot of times, say, for example, if it's shared by like a government official or the government authorities or like celebrities on their public account, then there's a very likely chance that you can probably use it. And then, if there's a really strong fair use case, you can probably also use it without sort of necessarily reaching out for permission. However, if it's shared by like, say, an individual, for example, you'll probably want to reach out for permission. A lot of newsrooms sort of have lawyers or like a legal team that you can speak to when you're not sure. I think usually on like in terms of like the best sort of practice is just like, if you're really not sure, just ask someone and reach out if you're really not sure, and try and get permission, and then try and get clarity in the meantime, because you don't want to necessarily sort of be using somebody's content without their permission, for example. A lot of the sort of different workarounds that I've seen sort of people do on sort of TikTok, for example, is just to screenshot like an article, where you can still sort of see like the publication sort of their logos or anything like that in general. But it's sort of, this is still sort of a gray area in general. So it'd be good if you like are not sure, just like reach out or get some clarity, ask your editor, ask your legal team, sort of who are more versed in sort of media law in general. Unless you already have like a paid subscription, then in which case like you can totally just use those photos and it's totally fine.
Very helpful answer. Thank you so much. So I'm going to tie in two questions that have come in. Um, One of our attendees is asking for more information on how social media can be a potential liability for journalists, and another attendee is asking, have you ever had a bad experience with social media?
Yeah, definitely. I think like social media is, it's great. It's a good way to reach your audience, great way to sort of engage with them and like have conversations with them. I think it's also sort of a double-edged sword, because sometimes, you might post a piece of content. You might, like, for example, you might share something on your Instagram and then you get sort of like trolls or, people who don't necessarily like your content. A lot of my sort of journalist friends have sort of been doxxed as a result of their reporting, for example, on something. So I've obviously had bad experiences on social media as well. Sometimes I share stories on social media, and then there people start in the stories start getting harassed. There's a lot of trolls and haters in the comments, and it's sort of creating this really negative space on, say, like on the World account. Sometimes we'd share stories about critical of potential sort of potential sort of, I guess, like subjects, and then there's a lot of backlash or there's a lot of hatred. But I think a lot of times it's really sort of making sure that if there are attacks on you as a person, to make sure that you are taking care of yourself at those times, because cyber harassment and bullying is really real, and it does affect people. So it's really important that you take sort of, measures to, look after yourself during this time. So you may want to sort of, remove yourself from social media for a while if you're facing a lot of backlash, over just sort of like your own stories, for example, even though, everything is backed up in facts, and you've done your reporting, people will still, there are just a lot of people out there who have a lot of time on their hands and sometimes will take issue with sort of the work that you do. So you want to be able to make sure that you are sort of taking time for yourself, and making sure that, you're getting support, and then, speaking to, if you have like a newsroom, speaking to your editors and seeing if there are things that they can do to sort of support you and making them aware of sort of any sort of backlash that you may potentially be facing. I think it's also, say, for example, like if you're running an Instagram account, for example, like, I'm running Almost, and maybe I make a post about something, maybe it's about trans rights, for example, and then there's a lot of comments where, people are very anti-trans, for example, then, usually it's better not to look at the comments, because it can be kind of, I think that's just a good rule to just like, you can look at the comments, but if it's really, really bad, just like don't look at them, and don't necessarily touch them or try to delete them, because if you delete them, sometimes you might actually end up getting more backlash, because people will say, oh, look, this person then deleted all these comments, this media outlet or this journalist like deleted all my comments, look at this, here are the receipts, and then you'll face more backlash because it's like, oh my god, can't believe they like deleted comments, how could they do that, they obviously have something to hide, which then just creates more backlash. So usually it's just best to leave it and sort of move on from that and just sort of focus on building a positive community that then will do all the fighting for you. So that is like the ultimate goal. So nearing the end of my time at the world running the world account, we actually were able to achieve that. So, whenever there was a lot of hatred in the comments, against other people or anything like that, or discrimination, what happened was, because we were able to build up this really engaged community of people who were really passionate about the world and really engaging with the content, people would always go into the comment sections and look at what other people are commenting. And then when they were haters or when they were trolls, people would come to the defense, and they'd have witty comebacks. They would basically do all the fighting of the trolls for you. And so, it then ends up building, they'd have these like great comebacks, and then, that comeback would then go viral. And so, it ends up creating this sort of positive sort of environment where it's like, where there is a sort of a no hate sort of policy in place, that isn't necessarily spoken, but it's really important just to focus on sort of, so I think it's really important to sort of focus on growing that audience where it's like, who are really sort of engaged with your content and understand what it is that you do, and sort of building a community that you would sort of like to see, so that if you were sort of to be faced with sort of trolling or any sort of hatred in general, that they would sort of rise to sort of defend you in general.
Well, that's really helpful. So, turning to social media being used as a force for good, how can you balance doing posts that your audience is likely to want to engage with against doing posts that you believe are important for your audience to see but may not be appealing in terms of engagement? But also, how can you build your your journalism career, and how can social media help with your brand? Sorry, that's a lot, but I feel like
No, it's cool. Yeah, sure. So that's definitely like a struggle, because if you say, if you just sort of look at, this is like, I just spoke about sort of the importance of data and like how important it is, how it can sort of help you to make your decisions. So you see, oh, this thing is going viral, let me just like do it again, and then I'll go viral again. It's definitely very like, it can be sort of this loop where then you get stuck into this thing where, we've all seen sort of media outlets who sort of really lean into that, and sort of tabloids that sort of lean into that because they're there for the clicks. They're sort of trying to just be like, we're only after the traffic. So I think it's really important to sort of always think with like, that's why it's important to have the vision, because you're always thinking with your vision in mind, because sometimes you may know the story is going to do super well and people are going to click on it because it's super controversial, but then maybe it goes against sort of your mission, it goes against sort of the community that you want to build, like the vision of what you want to build, then potentially you may not necessarily do that. So it's really important that you don't let sort of data dictate your decisions, and also, but just sort of letting it inform your decisions, because at the end of the day you still have to make that judgment about whether this piece of content is something that fits into your mission, is something that sort of serves your audience, is something that is going to actually contribute to sort of healthy conversations on the internet, instead of sort of focusing on just sort of driving traffic. So it's always really important to sort of take that big picture view of just sort of taking a step back every time you sort of see a piece of content and thinking, is this actually, just like asking yourself, like, is this in line with my mission? Does this serve my audience? And sometimes you're going to have to end up doing posts that like nobody knows about, because you might be like, oh, for example, on Almost, a lot of times we're focusing on like, we're covering world news, which means that we cover news from stories from countries that a lot of people haven't heard of, and a lot of times they're going to flop because people don't know about this small country on the other side of the world. They've never heard about, let alone like this very specific issue that this country is sort of facing. But at the same time, because it makes sense for the mission, which for me is to inform young people about things that are going on around the world, important things that are going on around the world, this may be important. And so you are just sort of going to have to sort of just post it, and knowing that it might not necessarily do as well as other content, but that's okay, because we want to take a very sort of holistic sort of approach to thinking about performance of our content. Because say you post about this small country on the other side of the world that nobody's ever heard of, and then it gets like 100 likes, I'd be really happy with that. If, say, like, depending on how many sort of followers you have, say I have like, I don't know, 500 followers, and then it gets like, I don't know, 50 likes. It got like 50 likes, and then I'd be probably quite happy with that, because it's like, oh, actually, this is a pretty good amount of people, good ratio for something that's like, that nobody knows about. And then you can also look at sort of other factors like, quality of comments, and the types of comments. So maybe, you go in and then you get like 2 or 3 comments that are like, oh, thank you so much for sharing this with me, I didn't realize this was happening. Then that's really good, because that's a sign that people actually like learn something new. Or maybe you were able to reach every single person in that small country, and they all commented and they all shared it. And then you can say, oh, that's amazing, I was able to reach like a new segment in my audience, and I was able to reach every single person in this country, even though they may only, say, hypothetically be like 50 people, but all 50 people in this country saw my post, which is such a win. So you really want to be sort of thinking about quite holistically about that. And then I think once you're able to sort of build up a really engaged audience, then they will be really sort of willing and happy to sort of engage with content that they may not necessarily know much about, but then they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can learn something new, sort of thing. And we sort of definitely saw that throughout my career, where when sometimes we'd be covering something quite niche, but at first not a lot of people would sort of engage with it, but then once you're able to build up that audience, then people will then people are actually taking an active interest in that, and you can sort of see the engagement and the performance grow over time. So you just want to make sure that you're sort of balancing it out, in terms of making that editorial call at the end of the day, instead of just sort of letting the numbers sort of dictate what it is that you post, because you may end up in a place posting content that you don't necessarily want to continue doing, in general. And then there was another question is, yeah, how can you build your journalism career, and how can you use social media to help your brand? So yeah, a lot of times what you can do is just sort of think of social media as a tool for you to sort of promote your work. So, for example, if you have posted content on, published a story on, for your media outlet, it's on the website, maybe what you can do is you can share it on your own Instagram, and you can say, hey, everybody, I've done a new post. This is about blah, blah. Why don't you check it out here? Or maybe you want to make a video on YouTube, for example. So what you can do is you can, maybe you want to turn your story into video, or maybe you want to do a vlog, and you say like, hey, I'm going to, walk you through the behind the scenes of how I made this video, of how I did the reporting for the story, for example. So you can sort of think about social media as like a different place for you to help to promote your stories, and being able to do that will then be able to help you to build your journalism career.
Excellent. So I guess we have about 6 minutes left, so this might be our last question for tonight. How did you build your following, you personally?
Sure. So I think the key to building a following is sort of, as I spoke about, really important is consistency. So just making sure that you're posting consistently, and then having sort of a clear mission, and a brand, so that, when people come to you, when people encounter your content, they're going to be like, oh, okay, I understand. Then they come to your profile, and then they'll take a look, and they'll say, oh, okay, it's clear what this profile is about. I'm gonna basically follow it because I like it, or not follow it because I don't like it. But having them being able to make that clear decision. So obviously, posting consistently doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to grow your followers immediately, because if you're working, especially when you're just trying to post organically on social media without sort of paid ads, it can take a little bit of time before anything starts to happen. But just know that it's exponential. So what you'll do is you'll be posting slowly, and you may gain like one follower every now and then, but then maybe one of these days you'll gain like 2 followers, and then you gain like 3 followers. But then you'll sort of there'll be a point where you sort of hit that inflection point where you are making because you've been posting consistently and everything is good, creating good content in line with your brand, etc., etc. And then you will post the right piece of content at the right amount of time, right when people need it, and the right person is going to find it. And then you'll hit that point where that post will then go viral, and then everything becomes easier, because after that, then if you just continue posting good content, then it sort of goes upward like that, and then you start growing, and then your account starts to really, really grow. And obviously there are other things that you can do as well to like grow your account. You can like collaborate with influential sort of places, like for example, a lot of my following came from when I did a collaboration with Instagram. So I collaborated with the official Instagram account, and that helps to sort of help me to gain more exposure to sort of more audiences that may not have seen my work. So there are obviously like a lot of different ways that you can do this, but what you can personally do on like on your personal level is just to make sure that you're making good content that people want to share, so that you're able to, whenever you make something new, you are reaching as many people as possible. Because relying on organic does take time, but also it's super powerful, because word of mouth organic sort of shares are like the most powerful thing out there, because it's like people are putting their sort of reputation behind it, to be like, look at this piece of content, I think it's great, I'm putting my personal stamp of approval on it, and that speaks volumes to everybody else that follows them. So what you want to do is just make sure that you're creating good content that people want to share, posting consistently, having a clear mission and vision and sort of brand in general, and then just doing that and trying to make sure that you are listening to your audience, but just making sure that you're sort of trying to reach as many people as possible, and then creating good shareable content, because at the end of the day, like, content is king, and it's gonna just making good content will ensure that you are able to build your following.
As a final takeaway, as a journalist major, any advice after graduation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a lot of times it can be quite daunting, especially when you're coming out of college, because everything seems like, it's there's a lot of decisions to be made, and everything seems very serious, and it could have lasting consequences on sort of your life and your career. But I think my advice is just to sort of don't take it too seriously, just sort of try things out, especially when it comes to social media. I think it's a place for testing and sort of having fun. So don't be afraid to just like test things out. So if you say, like, you just come up with an idea and you say, should I like do that on social media? Then you can say, sure, let me just try it, because it's not really necessarily going to hurt anybody, and it usually doesn't have that long of a lifespan anyway. But I think it's just sort of not necessarily being so serious about it, and just sort of experimenting and sort of taking things as they come. Like, for example, I did not think that I would be working in radio after I graduated, but this job opportunity came along, and I thought, okay, let me just like let me just try it out and then see if I like it, kind of thing. So just sort of adopting that. And then I think, like, eventually, because I'd always sort of thought that I would work in, I guess, like some sort of online journalism, but then I ended up working in radio when I first got out of college, and that was not really in line with sort of what I was sort of hoping for. But then, as you can see, after some time, I've actually eventually made it here, and when I look back, I'm sort of like, yeah, I've been constantly sort of discovering things about myself throughout this time. And when I was at ICRT, for example, I was also able to do some online stuff, and then that led to further opportunities, and so on and so forth. So just sort of try things out and see if you like it and see what happens. I think that's generally sort of a good approach to take, and so instead of sort of being really afraid to sort of make a decision, or holding off on a decision, because holding off on an opportunity because you're not necessarily sure if it's the right thing for you in the long term. It's always you just never know until you sort of give it a go. So especially when you're coming out of college, there's still a long road ahead of you, so you still have a lot of time to discover these. There's no other time to discover these things about yourself. So I would definitely say just like give things a go, and then you can make a decision about whether you like it after you've tried it out, and then you can make you can move forward from there and move on to the next thing.
I think that is very wise as advice. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about social media for all of us journalists. It was a pleasure. This recording will be posted on YouTube, our SPJ YouTube channel. And don't forget about the SPJ Region 2 conference, April 8th to 9th in Roanoke, Virginia, and online. And the URL for the recording on the YouTube channel has been provided in the chat, so make sure to bookmark that. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.